My name is Jack. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Jack.
And it's nice to be in a room full of people who have beaten the death penalty. You know? I'm watching that Susan Smith trial down in South Carolina, and she wants to beat the death penalty. And we've all beaten the death penalty because alcoholism is a death penalty. And we've all beaten it. Today, we've beaten it. And it's 100% fatal. And last week we were on step 10. I think all these steps are one connected with the other. I don't think you can do step 11 unless you've done step 10 properly. I don't think you really can be into prayer and meditation if your head is full of anger and you've got other people living in your head rent-free. You really can't be into prayer and meditation. Step 10 tells us we can continue with the program, and we continue to admit we're powerless over alcohol, and that there is a power that can keep us away from alcohol, and that we do make a decision to turn our thinking and our behavior over to the care of God as we understood Him. Seems to me this program is really broken down into 3 areas: me, God, and others. And the first 3 steps are me, God, and others. And the 4th and 5th are me, 6 and 7 are God, and 8 and 9 are others. And the 10th is me, the 11th is God, and the 12th is others. Seems to follow that pattern. And relationships are very important to us. We continue to take that inventory and continue to remove those defects and continue to make amends. And I think the 10th step for me actually really focuses on anger. That's really the problem of most alcoholics. Anger. No alcoholic worthy of the name is free of anger when they come in here, that's for sure. That's the only way we know how to communicate. I have a little story that goes with the 11th step. And the 11th step for me was a step that really, really changed my life and how I lived life. I was a little kid growing up in the Bronx. I think half the room has heard this story, so forgive me. When I was a little kid growing up in the Bronx, I was 9 years old. And where I lived in the Bronx, nobody owned the home that they lived in. We all lived in an apartment. And I lived on the 5th floor of a 5-floor walk-up. My mother used to tell me it was for the view. But I think it had more to do with the rental going down as you went up. It was a wonderful place to grow up. And there was one kid on the block who had a backyard. And he was raising some rabbits in the backyard. And he had a number of them after a while. And I was 9 years old, and he came to me and he said, "Jack, would you like 2 rabbits?" And we lived in a 3-room apartment, and there were 3 children and my mother and father. And I knew I would have to clear it with the Mrs. Keegan in order to get these rabbits into the house. And I knew that this wouldn't be easy. So I went up to church, Our Lady of Angels, and I did the Stations of the Cross, praying for the Holy Spirit to come down on my mother to let her have me bring these rabbits home. Because if I knew, unless there was some divine intervention, she would throw me down the stairs as soon as I asked her about it. So I went to the church, and for those of you who are not Roman and are unfamiliar with what we do, there are 14 separate stations around the church, and the thing takes about an hour, and there's a lot of bouncing up and down. You feel like a jack in a box when you finally finish with it. But Sister told me that I could feel secure that once I did the Stations of the Cross, God would grant me what my petition was. So I did the Stations of the Cross and went home to my mother and explained as best I could that Peter down the street had 2 rabbits and he'd like to give me 2. Would it be all right if I brought them home? And she threw me down the stairs. And I was very disappointed in a lot of ways. I was disappointed because my prayers were not answered the way I wanted them to be answered, and that God was disappointing me. And then when I came into AA and I read this 11th step, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out, it seemed a strange way to go through life, you know. And I realized that I'd been praying for rabbits all my life. They just came in different forms. I would pray that I'd, pass a test. One time I prayed that Santiago was the capital of Brazil, because that's what I put on the test, that it was the capital of Brazil, but that didn't work. And I would pray for a number of things, and I think I thought God was like some cosmic candy machine, that if I said the right thing, the candies would come out the way I wanted them to. And this makes it very simple. There's a story about Bo Jack, who was a lightweight champion of the world, a boxer. And Bo Jack was an excellent boxer. And he shined shoes at the Augusta Country Club in Augusta, Georgia, and he rose to being the lightweight champion of the world. He was an excellent, excellent fighter and a deeply religious man, deep faith. And he prayed before every fight. And the story goes that a sports writer by the name of Bill Hines was asking him, he said, "Bo, what do you pray for when you pray before the fight?" And he says, "I pray that it be a good fight and that nobody gets hurt." He said, "Don't you ever pray to win?" He said, "No." He said, "If I pray to win and the other guy prays to win, then what's God going to do?" And it seems to me by that story, he had more of a grasp of the 11th step than I did. He knew that, that's not what this is about. It's not for praying for things. It's prayer and meditation. I think the most important word in the 11th step is the first word, sought. I hear so many people say, I have trouble with the spiritual part of this program. And of course, we all know that it's a spiritual program. So there are no spiritual parts to a spiritual program. And sought means seek, look for, try and find. In Bill's story in the big book, remember when in the beginning of his story, he talks about the Hampshire Grenadier, that he went to visit Winchester Cathedral, and he saw this doggerel on a gravestone about the Hampshire Grenadier who died, and he said it makes no difference, I forget the exact wording of it, whether he's a good soldier dieth by gun or by pot. By a small cold beer or by pot, makes no difference. He's dead, he's dead. And I thought to myself, this guy's a boozer, right? I mean, Bill Wilson is a boozer. This is 1918. He's going over to Europe. And if he's like me, what's he doing in Winchester Cathedral? Huh? Why is he there? This guy should be in a pub. Shouldn't be in a cathedral. But if you ever read the book Bill W., he was terrified of this war. And I assume most any soldier is terrified of going into battle. But he was terrified about going over in the ship. He thought he was going to be killed. And I suppose that's the reason he went to Winchester Cathedral, because he was terrified. And later on in his story, he says, after the visit with Ebby, that he was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. When we want him enough, he is concerned with us. So, how much do we want him will tell us how much we seek him. And he says, that's when the scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes and a new world came into view. And that was the time that the day at Winchester Cathedral came back to him. He was convinced that if he really wanted God enough, God would be concerned for him. And I think, God doesn't make it difficult for us, but we do have to seek him. We do have to seek him. And we seek him through prayer and meditation. And I know a lot of people say, I really don't have the time to meditate. And I'm not here to give a talk on meditation, but I can just share with you what I do. I figure there's 1,000 minutes of the day that I'm awake. About, give or take. Sometimes more, sometimes less. But 1,000 minutes every day I'm awake. I take 5 of them, and I just think about the steps. I just think about how I can be useful. And sometimes I just think, think about what this program is about. Think about how lucky I am to be here. Think about what's been removed from me. And that's my meditation. No big deal. Sometimes I do it in the car. Sometimes I'll do it early in the morning, sitting in the kitchen. No mantras, no chants, just thinking. And sometimes just to go on and see where the thinking goes. Sometimes I don't like where the thinking goes, but sometimes it'll just go there. But it puts me in touch with what this program is all about. It says that in the big book that when we go to sleep at night, we should have some nightly reflections. I think that's a good idea. I can't say that I do that each night, but when I do it, I feel better. But one of the things that it says on our nightly reflections, were we kind and loving toward all? That's what the book says, kind and loving toward all. The clerk in the store, that woman who doesn't know where she's going and begins to write the check out when she gets there, Were we kind and loving toward everyone? That's what the book tells us that we have to be, kind and loving toward all, everybody. Could we have done better? That's a reflection that we should make with the 11th step. Careful not to drift into morbid reflection, worry, or remorse. It will diminish our usefulness. Morbid reflection, worry, or remorse are all symptoms of our basic disease of selfishness. What are we worried about? What are we remorseful about? What are we morbid about? Am I going to get this? Am I not going to get that? Is that, obviously there are certain worries in our life, but I think most of the time we worry because we're demonstrating our symptoms of selfishness. We ask God's forgiveness and what corrective measures should be taken. On awakening, consider the plans for the day and ask God to direct our thinking. I tell you what I do on awakening. I say, I'm going to enjoy the day. I'm going to enjoy this day. Now that doesn't always happen, doesn't always happen. But at least my head start is, I'm going to enjoy today. I got up this morning and said, I'm going to enjoy today. I didn't get up and say, I don't know what's going to happen today. I hope this doesn't happen today. I'm going to enjoy today. And most of the time it works. It works just fine. This whole program works just fine. The book then goes on to talk about asking God for some inspiration. But it also warns us to watch out for spiritual pride. You know, that person that thinks they have the direct link to God, I know what God wants for you, just ask me. And, you got to be careful of that. And never a request for ourselves. Never a request for ourselves. I think that's so important. No more rabbits. No more rabbits in my life. I don't pray for rabbits anymore. I report for duty in the morning and say I'm going to enjoy the day. When you're agitated or doubtful, the book says to pause. That's a nice way of saying keep your mouth shut. Huh? Couldn't half of the trouble we're in be avoided by keeping our mouth shut? I find that a lot, particularly around the house. Just keep your mouth shut and do it. Do it yourself. But, of course, the 11th-step prayer is, Thy will be done. We become more efficient. Meditation, the book says, is necessary for our spiritual objective. And that seems to be very, esoteric that we have a spiritual objective. But when you think about it, you don't start building a house until somebody conceives of what the house is going to look like. And if where we're going in this spiritual world of ours, we got to have some concept of it. What do I want to do? How do I want to be useful? What kind of a person do I want to be? This program permits us to be the kind of person we want to be. When we pray and meditate, the book reminds us that the channel must be clear. And to say any prayer we want, really. And the prayer that I say is the prayer that I spoke about last week. Please God, come into my heart, come into my mind, come into my soul. Stay there. Don't leave. And give me peace. And I say that a few times during the day. And, it's not the greatest prayer in the world, but it helped me. But I cannot pray and meditate when the channel that I have is choked up with fear, anger, misunderstanding, and frustration. I have to be careful about God's will for others. And the 12 and 12 tells us that when we do this prayer and meditation, and I hadn't realized this, but it's true, we have a sense of belonging to the world. We're part of the world. This prayer and meditation about God's presence makes us part of this world and reminds me again that I am a spiritual being going through a human experience. Some of the things that they suggest to meditate on are the steps. And, just go through the steps. Just go through 1 through 12. God's love. God is love. Nobody can love like God. We attempt it, but nobody loves us like God loves us. What can we do to help others? How can I be more efficient, less angry, more tolerant, more understanding? I think understanding is really what, if we can pray to be understanding of the people around us, if we can pray to be in their shoes, walk that mile in their shoes and understand them. That's something I never really attempted to do when I was drinking, was understand anyone else. Sometimes if you just sit, and the book calls it watching my thoughts. Don't battle them. Don't try and control them. Just watch them. Watch them drift by. And you can see yourself growing calmer, be at peace, and having direction. And there's a saying that muddy water, if you let it stand, becomes clear. And if you just sit and let the thoughts roll by, things clear up. And it just takes, as they say, 5 minutes. And that's all that's necessary. We talk a lot about the spiritual life in this program. And I came across this definition of the spiritual life. And it is the growing ability to work consistently and effectively where God has put me. Growing ability to work consistently and effectively where God has put me. Isn't that what He wants us to do? He wants us to be efficient. He wants us to do it consistently. And He puts us where we are, He really tells us what our jobs are. He's given me a few. He's given everybody in here, in this room, a few. We're husbands, we're wives, we're mothers and fathers and sons and daughters. All those things have their certain obligations to them. What kind of jobs we have have certain obligations. And the growing ability, meaning that we continue to become more and more efficient and more able to work consistently. And that's the reality for me today. That spiritual life. And I don't mean that, I'm constantly on a prayer mat, but spiritual life for me is simply to grow in my ability to work consistently and effectively where God has put me. And that's reality. And we know that there's no cheap grace in this program. Reality is not given to us. It's mined like gold. And I'm really free, if you think about it, I'm really free when we are willingly doing God's will. If you think about that, that's real freedom, isn't it? To willingly, I want to do what's right. I willingly want to do God's will. And the finest prayer that we can make is, Thy will be done. And the ability to pray for this commitment is working the steps. Not just the 11th step, but all the steps. You can't work the second step without working the first, and so forth and so on. And it just gets better and better, And I was told when I came in here that, Jack, it gets better and better, and when you don't think it can get any better, it gets better. I think I was at a meeting last night. We had one of the great meetings in our group last night. It was just wonderful. Jane spoke. She qualified. She was just marvelous. I think it's a privilege to be around when somebody qualifies for the first time. I really think that's a privilege. to see that courage, come up and what they say is so great, Most of the time they're looking at their shoes, but who cares? We know how they feel, and we know the courage that it takes for them to do that, and it's a privilege. You don't get to do it very much. And because in our group you qualify in Far Rockaway someplace, but Jane qualified last night, and it was just a privilege to listen to her. And then we had some discussion about the frogs, whether they were on a lily pond or what. The two frogs, and one decided to jump off, and the guy got the story all screwed up. And then there was a story about the ducks returning to the pond, and one guy, call him Night Train Eddie, and it has nothing to do with transportation. Night Train Eddie came to us, and he didn't look too good when he came. And that was 6 years ago, And now Night Train is looking for a job with the government. He's graduated college. And when you think about it, you can't get from where Night Train was to here. Can't do it. Night Train couldn't decide for himself when he was drinking that I'm going to go to college and I'm going to get a government job. Couldn't do it. Cannot get from there to here. I think that's most of us in this room. I know where I was, I could not get from there to here. Could not. No matter how much willpower I exerted, I could not get from there to here. It had to be as a result of the power in this program. It had to be as a result of things that just happened. Just happened to me. I don't know why, but I show up at the meetings and I yell at newcomers. I think that's very important. And what's more fun than yelling at newcomers? I mean, let's face it. There's nothing more fun than that, We had a guy the other day who was drinking near beer. And I mean, come on. What's more fun than that? Trying to explain that to him, that it's really, it's a lot of fun. But you can't, without the power, we can't go anywhere. We can't do anything. And we know, it says in this step, God as we understood him. But as I started out this series, it's God as we experienced him. I mean, we experienced God working in the lives of people in our groups. Unbelievable. I mean, I listened to Jane last night, for God's sake. She was standing outside the door of the church, first looking around, So I didn't know. Well, I said, you looking for Al-Anon or AA? And against her best judgment, she said AA. So I said, come on in there. I got a couple of young ladies that want to talk to you. So. But, and then where she came from, that shy, hesitating, confused little girl to speaking last night at the meeting. You can't get there. Can't get there. Can't study that. Can't pick up a book and read about how to become sober. Can't, no laboratory to go to, no professors to lecture you, none of that. You got to experience it. And we see God working in our lives. We see this experience. Like, just as I was saying earlier, that, the airplane, we trust that pilot. I don't know anything about the pilot. I don't say I'm going to go to Buffalo with the pilot as I understand him. I don't say that. I go to Buffalo because I think that pilot's experience, I know the experience of flying to Buffalo. I never was in a plane that crashed. That's my experience. So I think we experience God in our lives, and we experience him working with others in our group, and we just see miracles. We see them. Oh, God. Night Train Eddie last night. Somebody said, Night Train, I can tell the difference. You're wearing a white shirt. Yeah. He looked wonderful. And here he's a college graduate looking for a job. Now let me get to my questions here. Questions for step 11. When I pray for knowledge of God's will, should I remember to keep my prayers focused on this 24-hour period? Yeah, that's, we have to keep it a day at a time. And I think, this knowledge of God's will for us is really, it's really no mystery, is it? Huh? Really no mystery. We know how to be spiritual beings. We know that we want to grow in the ability to work more consistently and more efficiently in whatever the job is that He gave me. He made me a lawyer, He made me a father, He made me a husband, and He made me a number of things. He made me a husband today this is my 43rd anniversary today. I always kid my wife, 43 wonderful years, 41 for her and 2 for me. She doesn't like that, but that's all right. But yeah, keep it in the 24-hour period, but we know the jobs. We know what He wants us to do. He wants us to be a good husband, good whatever we are. And, that's not easy. I know that. It's not easy doing all the jobs that I got, being good at it, Sometimes I slip, sometimes I trip. But, it makes life so much simpler, I remember one of the first things that struck me when I came into AA, I didn't have to lie anymore. That sounds strange, huh? But I used to lie all the time. I'd come home, my wife says, "You're lying." I said, "Why do you say I'm lying?" "Because your lips are moving." I would lie just to keep in practice. Where were you today? I was in the library. I may have been in a store, but just to keep in practice, just lie. I can practice prayer and meditation by asking for help in the morning and saying thank you at night. Right. Yeah, but a prayer and meditation, I think, goes beyond asking for help and saying thank you. I think we really have to take the 5 minutes. And let me say, if 5 minutes is a very small part of our day, and my experience is that if you take 10 minutes, it doesn't double the effect; it quadruples the effect. It really does. This meditation business is something that really works. We don't do it. We're all so busy. Remember when you first come into AA, what am I going to do with the time? Right? What am I going to do? I'm right up at the mahogany for about 2 or 3 hours every day. Now I'm going to a meeting, and now what am I going to do with my time? And now we have no more time left. I don't know. I believe God's power will be there for me when I need it, right? God's power is always in this room, always in the rooms of AA. I think it's, they tell the story about the 2 fish that are swimming around, and they come to a big fish, and the big fish says to the 2 little fish, "The water's pretty cold today, huh?" And they nod, and the big fish swims away, and then one little fish says to the other little fish, "What's water?" I think this power is all around us. I think this power is all around us. We just got to tap into it. And we tap into it through meditation. Conscious contact with God, in my opinion, is thinking about God. God is a spirit, and our mind can think about the spirit. And that's the conscious contact with God that this step wants us to improve. I don't think it's a burning bush. I don't think it's a rock. I don't think any of those things. Maybe Moses had that experience, but I never did. And it's just, it's meditation. And it's prayer. for the power to carry out what he wants us to do. Other ways to improve my conscious contact with God is practicing the 12-step, attending meetings, and helping others. I think that's one of our primary purposes, is to be a good AA member. Red McIntyre, who recently passed away from the Sobriety Unlimited group, he would always say that that's the only question they're going to ask you when you get up to those pearly gates, is what did you do with the stewardship that I gave you in Alcoholics Anonymous? Because we all have the stewardship in Alcoholics Anonymous. We all have this gift. And someday somebody's going to ask the question, what did you do with it? Did you help others? Or did you turn your back? Or were you too busy? Or did you bring somebody around to a meeting? Simple thing, huh? It's a real spiritual act. So I think we're going to be asked that question. Because we certainly had this gift. If you're in this room, you've got the greatest gift that God can give anybody, in my opinion, is this program. And there's going to come a time. I mean, I don't think God gives away a gift like this and doesn't ask about it when you're finished with it. You know, you give somebody a bicycle, you're going to say, how'd you like the bicycle? You know, what'd you do with the bicycle? I think he's going to ask us, what'd you do with it? Were you a good AA member? Did you go to meetings? Did you help others? I think we have to do that. And not only that, I think it's fun. You know, I kid about yelling at newcomers, but I mean, working with newcomers is fun. Because you remember, you know, the crooked thinking that went on in your life when you first came in here. You know, you know, I wanted to smoke pot when I first came in here. I figured that, you know, it's not drinking, and I really missed the edge, you know. You know, I wasn't used to walking around sober, you know. I thought pot would be just fine. And someone stopped me before I, you know, because I had a lot of clients that used it. They raved about it. And the last question is meditation listening. I believe that attending a meeting and listening is probably one of the best forms of meditation. Because, you know, you always hear I always feel better when I leave a meeting. And I think that's true of everybody. It's true of me. I think it's probably true of the people who are sitting around here. And I think that's because we meditate at the meeting. We listen at the meeting. I listen to people as they speak. I listen to, you know, it's, you know, I'm just rehashing what's in this book for you, but the listening is meditation. And it's a form of meditation that really, really makes us feel good. And I think if we do that alone, and as this step suggests, prayer and meditation to seek His will for us, we do even better. I'm going to close with a little story, and it's a joke. So it's going to close with a joke for something different this time. Seems this drunk comes walking in the house at 8 o'clock in the morning, and his wife says to him, "Where have you been?" And he said, "Well, I got home at 12:30, and I didn't want to wake you, so I forgot my key, so I slept in a hammock in the backyard." And his wife said, "The tree that held up that hammock was blown down in a hurricane 2 years ago. There is no hammock in the backyard." And he paused and he looked at her and he said, "Well, that's my story and I'm sticking to it." I know nobody in this room ever did anything like that. But thank you. Next week is step 12.